use it on predator drones and surveillance apparatus. Anyway, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Just release everything that doesn't serve you, because it's all about you, the individual. None of the psycho-optic renaissance has taught me anything. It's about me. Right? The urgent emails from your boss, fuck them. They don't need to know that you're paying rapt attention to a stoner in a Speedo right now. You're at a colloquium, enriching your academic research prowess. And before we move on, I have to get my disclosures out of the way that I represent the Arctuarians and the Pleiades. I have conflicts of interest with the 5D beings of light, so... And now as you slowly come back to reality, I have mushroom chocolate for everyone.
Whoa!
That I made by hand, Myco Day. Yes, and everything done in-house, so we'll talk about that later. And these are functional mushrooms. I often have to explain that there are many types of mushrooms. These are not trippy mushrooms, bro, but at the end of the day, the trip is inside of us all, yes? So fear not, you can share these right now, and if I start to look a little wavy, maybe I'd bait and switched you. So, yes. Let's talk about satire. Thank you for indulging me in that exercise. I find it quite valuable to inject a little levity into the conversation as often as possible. And satire, what's a good working definition of satire? It's one of those words where everyone knows what satire is, but how would you define it? So my definition, one that I've heard which really resonates with me, is satire is wit wed to moral concern. There's typically a degree of offering social commentary and punching up. And I learned this accidentally. A lot of people say, like this morning, I heard Farzad say, is that your brand, Micropreneur? I get that a lot. People are like, it's very bro-y. Are you selling microdoses? It's Mycopreneur, myco being the prefix mushroom, preneur being someone who solves problems, is my understanding. And I think that people who solve problems with mushrooms and build mushroom businesses in any capacity, there's a lot of agency that they have. I did a year of interviewing C-suite executives and doctors and researchers and underground practitioners before I made one satire video. And the satire video got so much more traction and interest than a year of having publicly traded CEOs on. So I said, who am I to not give the people what they want? You know, I might as well double down on this. And I found out through that process that there's a rich vein to be mined in the psycho-optic renaissance, where there's a lot of low-hanging fruit for satire, for offering social commentary and questioning the direction that we're headed and doing it in a very humorous way. And hence is where the Speedo comes in. I realized I can talk a lot of shit to a lot of powerful people, and if I do it in a Speedo, it would not behoove them to litigate me. What does that say about their organization? It would be the best thing that ever happened to my brand if Christian Angermeyer tried to sue me for a video I made in a Speedo. So, yes, and through doing that, I realized a lot of people are hungry for this sense of humor right now. There's a lot of interesting things. Yes, sir?
Would you turn up to court in your Speedo?
Depends which country we're in. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I have wanted to pilot this for a while in such an academic setting, you know. So the idea, though, of satire, I think, is very brilliant in that humor extends beyond cultures and beyond linguistic boundaries. And I've found this out through doing the skits that I do, that the Three Stooges element of physical comedy really plays. People who don't understand the language can fully resonate with a character that moves in an unconventional way, that has physical comedy elements. And to illustrate this, I have a close friend, Josephine Nakakonde, who sells mushrooms and teaches women in sub-Saharan Africa, in Uganda, how to grow oyster mushrooms and lion's mane mushrooms as a means of economic solvency, essentially. And these are abjectly impoverished women who the system at play in the world has failed. Many are victims of domestic abuse in their culture, and they have no options. And she teaches them how to grow mushrooms and sell mushrooms in the area. They're on track to do something like 500 tons of mushrooms this year. And there's thousands of women who have been lifted from abject poverty into independent, mycopreneurial success. And she tells me, I have no idea what you're talking about when you say your video, but I love to see you run in the Speedo. And And I thought, okay,
you must get a lot of that though.
Yeah, you're gonna get a lot of that. So and I have no like plan here. My only plan was that meditation. So I'm winging that too. So hopefully that was beneficial, and hopefully you guys like the mushroom chocolate. That's what I also said. I was like, well, at least if I suck, I'll have given them mushroom chocolate. Don't give me that angry. So
is anyone still without chocolate?
I went to Brazil, to Sao Paulo, with the cast and crew of The Last of Us, which is a show about mushrooms. It was very fortuitous and strange. My wife got invited to do PR for them. I rode the coattails and went. In Brazil, people wear Speedos. I didn't have a swimsuit with me, so I got a Speedo from the hotel, and I made a satire skit in it. And again, it was one of those like breakthrough moments where the whole world was like, oh my God, he's a genius. He just made satire in a Speedo. How daring. And I realized like so many of the answers that I'm looking for come in this strange, liminal, humorous, unserious space. And almost for me personally, like the harder I try to swim and establish myself as a serious, respect-worthy individual, the less respect I get. But then when I come out swinging in the satire and talking shit, they're like, oh my God, this guy's amazing. So I think it's quite funny, and maybe there's an element of integration there of my psychedelic experiences, that many of the most profound psychedelic experiences I've had are in a recreational setting, overtly recreational, and you just can't stop laughing. You can't stop. And I recently wrote an article about this, which will come out at some point, and I have been critical of the medicalized lens, as many people have, and I don't doubt that people should have the option if they so choose, but I think there's just so much power and brilliance in putting ourselves in our place and not being a know-it-all. I think that's one of the epidemics of our time right now, is this rush to be a thought leader, an authority, a know-it-all. And you saw this without getting into the weeds, anyone. I do this sometimes. I go, so how do you guys feel about vaccines? No, just fucking up. But everyone pivoted from being an epidemiology expert to a geopolitical expert overnight. From COVID to the Ukraine conflict. It was the same set of people, just like, well, I know this and I know this. And I decided, like, there's something really empowering about intellectual humility, about being able to say, I don't know everything that's, I have my little lane, Yes, thank you. I think there's something really empowering and something that we can all learn from each other, to be cognizant of the fact that we only know a little slice of what's happening. We have our perspective at the end of the day. And that can be a good perspective, but we have to recognize that that's our perspective and that that's not a universal truth necessarily. And I just think satire is so good at that. So a number of these different stories bubble up to mind, but one other example. In 2010, I was an undergrad in college, and I was a young psychonaut, as many of us were at that age, and ready to take on the world and to evangelize about psychedelics, about if we just put mushrooms in the water supply, all the problems will be fixed. I still think we hear that rhetoric sometimes, right? And I had a chance to go stay with the family of Maria Sabina in Oaxaca. I was in Oaxaca. I had intel of how I could get to this family's house. Went up there, introduced myself with two friends, just said, hey, we were told where you live, and we were told maybe it would be okay if we came to see you, but we'll leave if you don't want us. They said, no, come on, you can stay. How long do you want to stay? So I stayed for 2 nights with them, and that was a whole chapter and experience that, like Osiris was talking about yesterday, really reframed a lot of my thinking about how much we know in San Francisco or in London or whatever, when you have this family who's been doing this forever and they don't call it psychedelics or anything. So the point of this story is that I came back 12 years later. I went back and stayed with the family after having this earth-shattering, incredible experience that stays with me today. And when I went back, I also stayed with them, and they gave me a velada, a ceremony with one of her nephews, and it was just me, and they had the copal going. And I didn't have this breakthrough that I wanted. Sometimes you feel entitled to a psychedelic breakthrough. You're like, I should have vision. I came all the way out here. Don't you know who I am? And literally nothing was happening. And I took a double dose of what they usually give. And I'm there, and I'm 2, 3, 4 hours in. I'm just like trying to force the trip. Be like, oh, patterns, bro. No. And then I thought, you know what? I had been making satire and skits at this point. I thought, maybe I'll just write down some skit ideas. As soon as I did that, I started getting hit with plot lines left and right from the mushrooms, in a sense. And it really told me, like, oh, these entities or tricksters or whatever they are, they like humor. They think it's funny. They think it's really funny, right? So what I see with the medicalized narrative, and quite frankly, I wrote an op-ed in High Times criticizing the medicalized psychedelic narrative, and I got a lot of fire only from people who are invested in the medicalized psychedelic narrative. about like, you gotta be careful what you say and this and that. Like, okay, well, so what I got from that is that this sense of having your own experience with your friends and, you know, pissing yourself late at night while laughing about the most ephemeral, mundane thing, that's really where so much power lies.
It happened last night. I mean, there were stories about it happening last night. I heard them.
And I don't doubt it. And I shall wish to join you on this expedition. Yes. So I just think it's really funny at the end of the day. Like, there's an Anna Karenina quote, if your revolution doesn't have dancing, I don't want to be a part of it. And I found that to be very true with psychedelics, that having gone on the conference circuit in the last few years, it's like, you know, you have letters after your name and you have a white man with an accent and a coat and they're showing data. I fell asleep during a presentation on psilocybin. And I remember thinking after that, be like, how did I fall asleep during a presentation on the most interesting thing in the world to me? And it ain't what you do, it's how you do it, you know? So I think there's a lot of value to that and to learning from each other too. And if you look at the satirical traditions across history, I have learned this, and I'm still learning it, about the jester's privilege, about this archetype of the jester, that in the courts of nobility during the actual Renaissance, not the psychedelic Renaissance, but the Renaissance, the jester is the only one who can tell the king to go fuck himself. And that's a really awesome privilege to have. And why would power structures allow that? Why would they allow somebody to come and ridicule them and make fun of them and tell the truth? Well, it's because if the king were to punish the jester, it validates what the jester is saying, right? So that sends a message. And by allowing the jester to do his thing, they say, it's just a fool, it's an idiot in a Speedo. He poses no threat. So then we get into even further interesting, nuanced territory where by doing satire and making fun of the corporadelic Renaissance, etc., they've actually invited me into the fold and started giving me platforms and podiums. And then you have to think, wow, there's a lot of levels to this game, you know? like, oh yeah, I had a ketamine clinic hire me to tell jokes to their staff. And they're low-hanging fruit. It's very easy to make fun of ketamine clinics, right? So I'm like, okay, so does this actually contribute to social progress, or have I become a dancing monkey on the payroll? That may be, so I'm sponsored by MicroBoost. Mushroom coffee, gotta get that disclosure out of the way. It's not an accident that's there. I grew up on South Park, I grew up on The Simpsons, right? And there's like really powerful life lessons that are imparted in these narratives, and I want to perpetuate that with psychedelics right now. I think that there's so many opportunities to do it. Thank you. And so again, I never intended to make satire. It just happened accidentally. It was a wonderful, strange, accidental occurrence. And it was one moment I can pinpoint when I became the satirist. And again, mind you, I was very much trying to prove myself, submit to publications, apply to this and that. And then I saw that on Instagram, they have a reel feature, if you know Instagram Reels. And I read that if you post a reel, that it will boost whatever it is you're posting. So me and my self-promotional glory, I said, I would like to promote my podcast, and I made a satirical reel. And that reel went immediately viral and afforded so many opportunities. And I realized there's the content. It wasn't just the fact that I was doing a reel, and it was called the Woke Capitalist Spiritual Retreat Center. And that whole point of that was, having lived on the border most of my life, having lived in San Francisco and been tangential to many cult-like dynamics, many retreats of the guru, the holier-than-thou, hierarchical, if you do ayahuasca stacked with 5-MeO DMT and then you follow up with Cambo and you do it the way I say it, you might have a chance at redeeming your mental health. That sort of character, right? But the fact that so many of these gurus set up shop in places like Mexico, Peru, Costa Rica, Jamaica, places where there's a colonial history and where there's lax regulatory scheduling, and I kind of called that out in a funny way, and that's what people wanted to hear. They said, you can do all the C-suite executive interviews you want with Ronan Levy or with this CEO or whatever, but like, this is what nobody's saying, this is what should be said. And I doubled down on it, and it's been a really fun ride since then, which led to Breaking Convention last year. And I thought it was quite funny, to share the stage with Nishay, a decorated academic with a decade. And my first quip at Breaking Convention was, there's a lot of PhDs here. I don't have a PhD, but I did used to sell mushrooms to people with PhDs. So I feel like I earned 2 of those letters. Dennis Walker, psilocybin dealer. at the end of the day, I do think laughter is medicine. That's my point I'll ride off into the sunset with, that if you can get people laughing and comfortable, that's such a huge icebreaker. It transcends cultures, it transcends demographics. And to curtail this diatribe right now, I think back in the 60s and before then, but we'll use the 60s as a focal point, there was an element of merry pranksterism. There was an element of Wavy Gravy, the Grateful Dead clown, and of people having fun. And I think the current drive with the psychedelic renaissance, the medicalization, is trying to sanitize and sterilize that out. And I recognize that there's a push to get these molecules and experiences culturally legitimized, but if we do that at the expense of humor and satire and this joy and this very grounding humanity, that's a huge net loss collectively in my eyes. So that's something, as more people try to polish the narrative and stand up straight, I'm going to go the opposite way. I'm going to be weird and be in a Speedo, and people can make of it what they will and enjoy, hopefully. And hopefully you guys have enjoyed this talk this morning, and I think that's all I have to say for the day. We'll put clothes on now.